Center and 8 climate science centers and LCCs and DOI LCCs. And Doug Austin found an hour for us on the agenda, and I'm grateful for that. And I asked him, what he would like us to talk about, and he gave me some objectives and some criteria, and hopefully we're going to meet those today. This presentation was jointly prepared by the 3 speakers that you'll see, plus Keith Nislow, who could not be here, so his name's on the agenda, but it's actually Steve McNulty's going to give that part of it. I wanted to ask if there's any National Forest Service folks besides the speakers in the audience. Okay, great. So there's about 25 of us here, and if they don't know an answer to your question, they probably know the person who does. So please seek us out. And I also wanted to mention the Forest Service folks, we're doing a happy hour today at the Yard House at 5:15, because we don't get to travel much, so I thought it'd be good for us to meet each other while we can. And I also want to mention that Dave Cleaves is here. He's from the Forest Service Chief's Office, and he's our climate change advisor, and real happy that he's here with us. So for the Forest Service folks, I'll apologize ahead of time that we did not cover everything. We tried to hit the highlights, and if your favorite program wasn't mentioned, feel free to share that during the discussion time. So hold on to your seats, because we have a lot to go through in a short amount of time, because we do want to have some Q&A at the end. So Doug said he'd like to find out, how does the Forest Service do it? How do we do science management partnerships? And then from that, how can the LCCs partner with the Forest Service? And so I'm going to give you some overview, and then Greg will cover land management, Steve will cover science, and Bill will cover collaboration, and I'll have some closing remarks. And I'd like to see if you could introduce yourselves now. Greg, could you stand up and...
Greg Adele, I'm the Senior Staff Assistant for Dave Cleaves in the Climate Change Advisor's Office in Washington.
I'm Steve McNulty. I'm a landscape ecologist, modeler in Raleigh out of the Eastern Forest Environmental Threat Assessment Center campus, NCC.
And I'm Bill Gould. I'm a research ecologist in San Juan, Puerto Rico, with the International Institute of Tropical Forestry and the Caribbean LCC coordinator, the only Forest Service LCC coordinator.
Yay! Okay, so here's the basics. Forest Service is in the Department of Agriculture, not Interior, which you may have picked up on yesterday. And the Natural Resources and Environment is our Undersecretary is Harris Sherman, the Chief is Tom Tidwell, and there's 4 mission areas with 4 deputy chiefs: research, state and private, the National Forest System, and international programs. And the names of the deputy chiefs are there. You might recognize some of them. So the field and regional offices is how we're organized. Is for the National Forest System, there's 9 regional offices. There's 174 national forest or grasslands, and you'll hear us say national forest for short, but we also mean grasslands. So those are supervisors' offices, and then within that they have ranger districts, altogether about almost 200 million acres. In research, we have nearly 100 places where scientists do their work, and they're called research work units, labs, institutes, that kind of thing. We have about 80 experimental forests and ranges, and those are organized through 6 regional offices that we call research stations. So research station is not like a lab. That's our name for a regional office. So I know there's been some confusion about that. And then there's state and private, and for all but one, that's managed within the regional office, but for the Northeast, they have 20 states, so they get to have their own separate office. So why does the Forest Service care about LCCs and landscape science and landscape management? Well, first of all, we're implementing Secretary Vilsack's All Lands philosophy and the Forest Service's landscape scale conservation approach. And we're already doing that through various mechanisms. What we have in common is we both embrace the landscape scale approach to conservation in the face of climate change and to provide science to support decisions. And we embrace the idea that this means interacting with a lot of partners and stakeholders. And we've been dinged by OMB in Congress for appearing to be redundant and reinventing wheels, leaving the federal community overall. So part of my job is to try to help us minimize that and minimize redundancy and try to find efficiencies. And plus, there's some great synergies that can happen as well. So what is landscape scale conservation about? It's about managing the land at the level of watersheds, ecoregions, and broad geographic areas. It's about framing problems and solutions at the landscape scale for a comprehensive approach to multiple issues, a way to coordinate goals and actions. It's about providing flexibility to see problems and risks at various scales and address them at the appropriate level. And it's about integrating stovepipe strategies into a single overarching framework, common language toolbox. And it's about providing communication and leveraging resources. That's what LCCs can do. They can help us with the communication mechanism across partners and to leverage our resources for these common goals. Formally, we have a Forest Service rep on 21 of the 22 steering committees. We have a rep on most of the science committees. Each state research station, each regional office has a point of contact for LCCs and climate science centers. And then we have coordination and communication at the level between Doug Austin, his office, Robin O'Malley in his office, and my office in the Washington office. And then, of course, we have Bill Gould, who is one only Forest Service coordinator of an LCC. With the climate science centers, we have coordination through myself and Robin O'Malley, and then I also coordinate with the climate science center directors, and then each of our research stations is involved in each of the climate science centers on the stakeholder advisory committees, and they comment on the science plans. We also have some on-the-ground projects going on in aquatic ecology in the Northwest and the Southeast. So what can we contribute to LCCs? We have a lot of employees with scientific backgrounds. In fact, there's more people with PhDs in the National Forest System than in the Research and Development System. We've got a lot of experience in analyzing complex ecosystems and how to manage them beyond the Forest Service boundaries. Including the expertise of the Forest Service would really benefit these large-scale management issues. So now, Greg, take it away.
Okay, so this is going to go pretty fast, and what I'm going to do is give you just a real high-level overview of some of our key policies and programs where we can interact with the LCCs on a landscape scale, and kind of give you just that quick look at some of these key programs, recognizing that our mission is very broad and really focused on sustainable management and dealing with not just ecological integrity but also social and economic sustainability. Okay, so the question is, does the Forest Service view land management from a perspective beyond the National Forest System boundaries? And the answer is an emphatic yes. We traditionally used to be fairly stovepipe, but in recent years we've been expanding our view of and recognition of upstream, downstream issues, and the need to work with other landowners and agencies and build on some level of cooperation and organization, such as, for example, working on hazardous fuels reduction. That's been probably the most aggressive effort that we've made, working with many partners to achieve land management objectives. So I'm going to touch on some of these issues regarding public lands, specifically, for example, the new planning rule just was approved last week. Climate change, how we're responding to climate change, and our scorecard approach. Collaborative forest landscape restoration, which you heard, if you were in one of the sessions late yesterday, we talked a little bit about that, and a few of these other programs. For example, with the state and private forestry deputy area, we've got Forest Legacy Program and Forest Stewardship Programs, and also a program called Open Space Conservation Strategy, which is kind of an all-encompassing long-term effort to bring these specific programs into play. And also, beyond just policy and programs, we're looking at ways to improve the delivery of important resource information to not just our agency, but to others who may have a need for sharing information and data. And I think I'm hearing that multiple times from several presenters over the last couple of days on the recognition of the importance to do that. Oops, wrong way. I messed up. There. Okay, so this is a national map of what the Forest Service National Forest System looks like. That's the green areas. The yellow in there are national grasslands, and this map, if you look closely, it's kind of fine scale, shows all our regional offices and research station locations. So, how are we applying adaptive management? That's one of the keys to sustainable management, and we've got several things that have come on board recently. I mentioned the planning rule, and this is kind of institutionalizing the whole concept of adaptive management into our planning processes for amending and revising our land management plans. Each plan guides integrated resource management on the National Forest unit, whether it's a forest or a grassland, and they have to take into account changing conditions, and that includes climate change. Also, the inventory monitoring assessment strategy that the Forest Service is developing now takes into account the value and need to keep on top of changing conditions, and that is in support of adaptive management. Okay, so the planning rule. Monica mentioned the 193 million acre national forest system. That's what this is focused on. It provides the process or framework for revising forest plans and keeping them current. The last planning rule, and the first one, actually was approved in 1982, and we've been trying multiple times to update it and get it more in line with 21st century thinking, and we finally got there, hoping that this one will stick. The framework does provide the concept of adaptive management and allowing us to respond to changing conditions, whether it's new invasive species, increasing human pressures, climate change related issues, and so on. So the planning rule requires use of best available scientific information. We have to do a heck of a lot more collaboration than we've done in the past with regards to our forest plan revisions, and the planning rule itself was probably involved the most collaborative effort. I don't know if for any agency, but at least for the Forest Service. I think we held numerous roundtables and regional meetings with all kinds of interest groups, and I think we received more than 300,000 comments on the draft plan regulations. Okay. So moving on to our response to climate change. Oh my gosh, already. I got to move. We've got what's called a roadmap, and that is more or less a strategy for dealing with and addressing the issues that climate change raises. And climate change response involves leadership commitment at all levels, our organizational capability to respond, the rapid science to action cycle, and we'll talk more about that as the other gentlemen get up here. It takes a lot of people to make this happen, so we've got a lot of coalitions that are coming together and collaboration that we depend on to get the science together and work with people to arrive at the right approaches to dealing with climate change. I'm going to mention the scorecard real quick. That's a way to step down the roadmap direction and the actions in the roadmap into action on the ground. And this one involves 10 elements, and The most appropriate ones, or probably relevant ones for the discussion today, are the ones related to science and management partnerships and other partnerships. We talked a lot about collaboration. Assessing vulnerability is another element, developing adaptation actions, and monitoring. And there's another one that's key also, and that's dealing with carbon and carbon stewardship on the land. So collaborative forest landscape restoration is another new program that's been around for a couple years. The intent is to encourage collaborative science-based ecosystem restoration of priority watersheds. The program is authorized up to $40 million per year. The first year, 2010, that was in place, Congress appropriated $10 million. So it's been going up. We've got about 20-some projects right now that have been approved, and there's an advisory committee that's been developed, and they are the ones who recommend projects to be funded to the Secretary of Agriculture, and he's the one who makes the final selections. But the scope of the work involves reducing the risk of uncharacteristic wildfire, improving fish and wildlife habitat, dealing with invasive species, addressing roads and trails that may be surplus to our needs and decommissioning those. And the other piece of this is utilizing woody biomass and small diameter trees as a means to help pay for the treatments on the ground, and also to reduce our emissions so that we're not having to burn slash piles and put more carbon into the air, and also generate jobs and products. Okay, I mentioned collaboration requirements. It's a very open, transparent process, and meets the requirements of the for a resource advisory committee. And this is a real rough map. I'm sorry about the lighting in here. It shows where current CFLR funded projects are located in the U.S. Just a real quick look at some of the accomplishments that were done in fiscal year 2011. 38 miles of stream habitat were restored, 167,000 acres of terrestrial habitat enhanced, and that could be including invasive species treatments. 20,000 acres of forest vegetation were improved, and that could involves thinning or planting, reforestation, and then 77,000 acres of hazardous fuels were reduced in the wildland-urban interface. Okay, another program, this is in the state and private forestry branch of the agency, is the Forest Legacy Program. And this is primarily aimed at identifying areas that are high priority for acquiring conservation easements. So these would be important for protecting, maintaining wildlife corridors, and protecting sensitive watersheds and other resources. It's an entirely voluntary program. And most of these easements restrict development and require sustainable forest management practices. And you can see on that map some of the locations of a lot of the areas of the country that are participating. The Forest Stewardship Program is another program in state and private forestry, and the intent of this is to work with private landowners to develop forest management plans so that they're practicing sustainable management and protecting sensitive resources. So it's another avenue to work with folks outside of the green line in important landscapes and achieving common goals and objectives. Okay. For example, the program came into place in 1991, and since then we've worked with private landowners to develop 340,000 management plans, and that encompasses more than 31 million acres. So it's a chunk of land on the private side that we've been working with folks on. Okay, one other item, then I'll be done here. Open space conservation strategy is another kind of a broad, long-term effort that the Forest Service has developed to work with private landowners across landscapes, and the intent is to work with them on developing strategic habitat conservation approaches and working with the Federal Highway Administration on what they call ecological initiative, and Department of Defense's sustainable range initiative. 4 objectives. Convene partners to identify and protect priority open space, promote national policies and markets to help private landowners conserve open space, provide resources and tools to help communities expand and connect open spaces, and participate in community growth planning to reduce ecological impacts and wildfire risks. Okay, and then one other item, and this is something that we're still working on in the Forest Service, but it's become a collaborative effort with some of the Department of Interior agencies at the national level, is what we're calling the Inventory Monitoring and Assessment Strategy. And this is very similar in character to the BLM's AIM strategy, Assessment, Inventory, and Monitoring Strategy. So we're looking at opportunities to connect up on those and find ways to work together to improve the resource information and delivery to decision makers and policy makers. 3 goals in the strategy: ensure that all the IM&A activities are comprehensive and inclusive, that we are delivering credible information, and ensuring that the IM&A activities and our programs are responsive and adaptive to change, given the dynamics that are going on across the country.
All right, for those who may have come in a little bit late, my name is Steve McNulty. I'm a research ecologist with the Forest Service. And this next section of the talk, we're going to just give an example of what the Forest Service does, some of the research we do at the different scales, so that those of you with the LCCs or the climate centers have an idea of how to link with us with types of works we do. We do a lot of work on landscape scale conservation as part of the Forest Service. Our mission specifically in research is to help facilitate, hey Deanna, good seeing you, is to help facilitate forest management. So our work is very much applied science. And so we do that over a series of different techniques. So the Forest Service is an all lands approach, and the questions are land management driven. We want to make science that's relevant to the land manager. We're not focused on just publishing the research in journals and that sort of thing. We have to make it applicable. It's broad and diverse. We have a lot of different types of ecosystems out there, from the forests to the grasslands and everything in between. We have all kinds of issues associated with those, from social issues to biodiversity, wildlife, etc. In total, we have over 500 scientists, more or less, and we produce over 3,000 pubs a year. So we do publish, but that's not our primary focus. There's a lot of examples of conservation relevance. In the specialized fields, we have mycology, we have the Starkey Project, which is a range study with ungulates. We have grassland projects, desert program with sage grouse habitat. We have a lot of interdisciplinary type of work. One is with the Eastern and Western Threat Assessment Centers, and they are, by their nature, meant to look at multiple factors of stress and also impacts on the environment. We have over 900 university partners, and they're co-located with co-appointments all over the United States. We have some flagships. You know, the Forest Service is very proud of their experimental forests, the oldest one being Coweta, established in 1934, Hubbard Brook, H.G. Andrews, and a number of others. In total, there's 82 across the nation, and these represent 32 ecosystem types. We also have the Forest Inventory Assessment. This is a database and a monitoring study that goes back over 70, almost 80 years now. And it's evolved over time. It was originally looking at timber supply for the U.S. Since that time, it now looks at a lot of other issues, such as biodiversity and other factors. There's issues as far as getting the data. Those issues aren't coming from the Forest Service. They come from the private sector through Congress to the Forest Service. And the problem or the concern is that we release too much information about the value of those lands, and that may in fact affect some of the stocks and value of the company. So that's not a Forest Service thing. That's dictated to the Forest Service. You can still get access to that information in different formats, either aggregated into larger spatial scales, or work with Forest Service scientists who can still get the point data and be happy to work with you. We also have other long-term studies at the landscape scale, And everything, the one that we have a picture of here, I guess this is an FIA plot. They're going out to somewhere in Alaska. They're getting access out there, so have trees, we'll get out there. Forest Service science, we conduct Forest Service work everywhere in the U.S. It doesn't have to just be in forests, it can be even up in the Arctic or Alaska. We have science centers in Hawaii. We also do a lot of international work. This graph on the lower right is Unangwa Valley. It's a watershed deforestation study we did down there on sediment in Africa, sponsored by the International Forestry Program, VALS Group. Key landscape conservation issues in science, there's a whole bunch of them. Water flow, fire risk, invasive species. We have to look at a lot of different issues because as the National Forest, they have to deal with these issues. So if it's an issue the Forest Service National System, grassland, would have to deal with, someone in the Forest Service Research Branch is looking at it. The science on the landscape scale conservation, we've alluded to this a little earlier. Monica talked a little bit about this, but we do have a decision framework. There's a point of decision making. We work on how decisions are made and ways that we can improve that process. We also have climate change adaptation guidebooks. We have different sources where we can learn about climate change impacts and management options to address those. We do a lot of work at the landscape level. We conduct long-term research at the experimental forests and also through different ecological studies. A lot of this work is multidisciplinary, and I'll run briefly through a few examples. Here's some work by Louis Iverson. It's a tree atlas. It looks at how tree species may shift over time in association with climate change under different climate scenarios. Here's another thing by Iverson. This one looks at the distribution of bird species and how they may shift in relation to the shifting patterns of tree species. Here's another one by Thompson et al. And this one looks at the interactions of climate and landscape change, habitat change, demographic change. All of these types of issues are coupled together. And what that allows is us to not only look at the range, but also the density and distribution of these important bird species. Some more work by Hudley et al. This one is on trout distribution. So we have a certain distribution of the native trout species, and then under climate change and other factors, how will that distribution change in the future? And also, how will the different levels of density of these species change over time? We also look at interactions with other factors. This one is some work actually I did. It's on acid rain, so acid rain impacts across the United States. But the question is then, how will climate change interact with acid rain? And in this study we found that there's a lot of bad things about climate change, but in this one study it suggests that the areas most impacted by acid rain may be lessened because of climate change. We also work on a lot of decision support tools. So these are the kinds of tools that allow the land manager to make the types of decisions they need to make day to day or longer term in forest planning. One is called the CRAFT process, and it's a process by which it helps you evaluate risk. Another one is a tool called TACAMO. It's a template for assessing climate change impacts and management options. It's a web-based tool that looks at the stressors of climate change at a national or local level, and then it gives the land manager options on how to address those stresses. Both these products use national scale information, and they're available through different websites. We also look at other types of models that are out there. One is called a WASI. It's a water supply stress index, and it looks at trade-offs between carbon, water, and biodiversity, again at the national scale, but focusing down to a 12-digit watershed scale. We also have the linkages with both the LCCs and the climate centers. In the southern station and in the southeastern area, we have a liaison person who is specifically designed to work between the Southern Research Station and the LCCs. And so Ginger has established these, we call them doggy bag series. They're monthly brown bags where we get together with the LCCs, the science centers, EPA, Forest Service, state meteorological groups, and we share information. Very informal, but a great way to make connections. And then what goes beyond forest boundary means we have an all lands approach, and the idea is that we have sustainable Forest Service research not only within the national forest but also on the non-forest game lands. So we partner with state and private and other individuals in order to address those issues. And then from a landscape conservation science, these are the types of questions that we ask, everything from wildlife or wildland fire, invasive species, wildlife and fish, recreation, etc. These are all the types of questions that we need to be assessing, and in one way or another we are assessing in the Forest Service. Water is one of our increasingly growing issues. I mentioned this earlier, but this WASI model is a model that we use to look at trade-offs between water yield and carbon sequestration. The chief said that one of our primary focus is to enhance landscapes, protect and enhance water resources, develop climate change resilience, and create jobs and sustainable communities. These are the types of models that we use to look at trade-offs between increasing carbon gain and losing water yield. These are not easy questions, but ones that Forest Service scientists are addressing. Landscape conservation at the landscape scale is the next talk, and I'm on a roll. I just keep going. Feed me slides, and we'll just keep moving. Okay, Bill?
Well, thanks to Monica for organizing this and the opportunity to speak here. If you did come in late, I'm Bill Gould. I'm a research ecologist with the Forest Service in Puerto Rico and the coordinator for the Caribbean Landscape Conservation Cooperative. And I'm going to talk about the All Lands approach and Forest Service partnerships, research networks, the All Lands approach in Puerto Rico, how we're trying to implement that, and then something about the Forest Service collaboration with the Caribbean LCC. So you've heard about this. I want to go back a little bit and talk about that USDA All Lands approach. This is from the first speech, major speech of the Secretary of Agriculture, Vilsack, where he mentions this all lands approach and the importance of that. And being a landscape ecologist, I cheered to that, but I really didn't expect to hear much more about it. I was wrong, however, that the landscape scale approach has been integrated with the Forest Service. This is from a speech by Forest Service Chief Tom Tidwell, also in 2009, where he reiterates the need for working beyond forest boundaries, collaboration, the only way we can solve some of these issues. You've heard that again and again. And he mentioned that this captures the spirit of the greatest good. And that is a quote from Gifford Pinchot, the first chief of the Forest Service. And he laid the foundation for the Forest Service, and here he iterates how conservation is something we work towards the greatest good for the greatest number of people for the longest time. And that has been, that philosophy now on the All Lands approach has been worked into the Forest Service strategic plan, and I'll get back a little bit later to how we're implementing that in Puerto Rico. But first I want to talk a little bit about collaborative research activities and use as an example the research collaboration that goes on at the International Institute of Tropical Forestry. This is a small research institute with about 8 scientists, but administratively it's on the level of Rocky Mountain Research Station or PNW, some of the larger research stations in the Forest Service. And this list of acronyms here, these are, for the most part, they're all national research networks, and they're all generating information about the environment that is very valuable. And they're all present in Puerto Rico. They're all networks that Forest Service scientists there interact with or lead. And they include the Long-Term Ecological Research Network, LTR, sponsored by the National Science Foundation. And there's an LTR site in the National Forest in Puerto Rico. ULTRA is the Urban Long-Term Research Area. That's another network of sites around the country with a site in San Juan, and it's supported by NSF and the Forest Service. NEON is the National Ecological Observatory Network, and there's a set of 20 domains that cover the continent. And one of those sites is in Puerto Rico, and we collaborate with that. USGS has a network of observatories as well. The critical zone observatories, and there's one of those, the LCZO is the Luquillo Critical Zone Observatory. USGS also has the WEB program looking at water, energy, and biogeochemical budgets. FIA you've heard about is the Forest Inventory and Analysis Network. LBA doesn't quite fit in there. It's the large-scale biosphere-atmosphere experiment in Brazilian Amazon, but that's also a big collaborative effort that was led for some time by one of the IATF scientists. The GAP program for Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands is led by IATF. The LCC now is part of the Forest Service there. And you've heard about the experimental forests and ranges. So those are all national networks generating a lot of information. And all that information is available from various places, some readily available, some not so readily available. And there's not really good integration of that information across platforms. And this is an issue that has also been brought up in a number of the talks, how the LCCs are really in a good position to develop some mechanisms to organize the information generated by the LCCs in a way that they can be readily accessible by managers, readily accessible for people that want to integrate that information and do analyses with that. So this set of sources of information really indicates a problem that, although it's out there, it's not really always readily accessible or always easy to integrate. So we were asked by the Forest Service to work with the IITF and the National Forest in Puerto Rico to try and develop an all-lands approach and in practice and see what it looks like. So I want to touch on a couple of the things that we worked on there. We began by gathering stakeholders and trying to get an idea of the current state of the landscape and where we wanted to see it go in the future. And as an example, we focused on the landscape around El Yunque National Forest in the northeastern part of Puerto Rico. And you can see various blocks of protected areas that are owned or managed by different agencies, various administrative boundaries within that area. And one of the initial things we did is just gather a lot of the information on land cover, animal distributions, land uses, population dynamics, the state of conservation of various components of the landscape. And that series of maps there that that I just showed looks a lot like what the LCCs do initially, is gather a lot of baseline information on the region that they're working with. So among these groups of stakeholders, we identified priority areas for conservation, particularly relevant for supporting the services and functions of the El Yunque National Forest. And then we looked for some correspondence between different stakeholders' views on where those priorities are. And so this gave us an idea of where we had some shared priorities. There were a lot of other things that went into the beginnings of this, developing this all-lands approach. And the reason I showed those maps and things is because they really correspond well with what the LCCs do as they're getting started. So some other points that have come out of trying to develop this all-lands approach are that we need to understand differences in values among stakeholders, build a common language, look for shared priorities, do we have a shared vision of future landscapes or can we develop one? Do we have a common understanding of what the most vulnerable species, habitats, and services are? And can we develop a shared vision of how to get to those future landscapes that we would like to see? And a couple of things have happened since this, we started working on this. One, the El Yunque National Forest was selected to be one of 5 forests to start to implement that new forest plan that was just mentioned. And so the personnel involved in that are also interested in the all-lands approach and integrating that all-lands approach into the forest planning. They're also on the steering committee of the Caribbean LCC. So it looks like there'll be a good correspondence between the information and expertise of the LCC can go into that forest planning process. And as you saw, the map of the Forest Service lands, that same planning process has to occur over that nearly 200 million acres of Forest Service land. So this might be an opportunity to show where the LCCs can contribute to that. A couple more slides in the The Caribbean LCC was initiated in the last year, and it involves most of the major stakeholders in terms of land management in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. And there's a lot of excitement with the initiation of this Caribbean LCC. This group of stakeholders, many of them have worked together for years on conservation issues and various research collaborations. But at the end of the day, each of those partners goes home. They make their own decisions about what to do in land management, what sort of things to publicize or promote or highlight. And there's a recognition that there wasn't really an entity that could be the kind of the voice for those shared priorities. And so there's a recognition that maybe the CLCC is that entity. A quick list of some of the partners involved and how they're collaborating. The Forest Service supported the initiation and coordination of the LCC, provides facilities, staff, research capacity. Fish and Wildlife Service instigated, supports the initiation, is helping to fund staff and the research capacity. USGS, all three of these agencies were involved in the initiation and providing expertise, funding through the Climate Science Center and also some other USGS funding support. NOAA's been very supportive, and we're looking at ways that they can support some of the staff in collaboration with Forest Service funds. Other agencies on the steering committee are NRCS, National Park Service, the Puerto Rico Department of Natural and Environmental Resources, and U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Planning and Natural Resources. So last slide, some thoughts on this collaboration of the U.S. Forest Service with the LCCs. The LCCs and the Climate Science Centers are in early stages. This is a great opportunity to the Forest Service to collaborate at all levels. USDA and the Forest Service bring a lot of expertise that has been mentioned earlier in monitoring forest ecosystems, many other things. USDA has a strong focus on working lands and agriculture, and a lot of conservation dollars go into that. That's a great place for the USDA to take the lead and say, yeah, this is where we're going to collaborate with the LCCs. A lot of Forest Service research integrates research and management, as mentioned, as our key element. Also a wide range of expertise. And I'm going to skip to the last point there, which I think is very key. There's a need to create a mechanism at the upper levels, the Forest Service and USDA, to really facilitate the collaboration that's already occurring at a lot of the other levels. And so that's kind of a missing piece at the moment. And I'll leave you with that.
Okay, so some summary points. So I think you can see the Forest Service incorporates science into the management through forest plans at landscape scales, and includes monitoring, and there's a good relationship there. National forests and grasslands are places where we can apply the science and learn and adapt as we implement the science, and that's happening at various forests across the country, that there's this deliberate adaptive management process going on. And I get asked a lot about, well, how can we work with the Forest Service, because the LCC community seems to be mostly focused on biodiversity, and the answer is that Forest Service does climate change adaptation for everything, and that includes biodiversity, but it doesn't, it isn't just wildlife, and so it's usable for you if, and probably more usable than just looking at wildlife, is we're looking at the whole ecosystem. So the partnerships are at the core of how the Research and Development Program does their work, and it's handled in a variety of ways, and that's an important point. Consistency is not something you will find in the R&D program very much. You'll find diversity and creativity, and that's a model that will bring up a lot of different ideas organically, which I think, is an asset. So there isn't like this pressure to have one size fit all, which I think is good for the managers, so you can shop around. I want to mention one really good example of integration, and intentional integration, as Bruce Stein mentioned, the Climate Change Response Framework, and there's a website. So that they're focusing on climate change adaptation, and there's this day-to-day integration between the scientists and the managers on that, and that's out of the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, one of our many institutes, and I recommend you look at that. You can Google, no, I gave you the website, okay. And again, as you know, the ownership doesn't stop at the boundaries, and with this new forest plan, the Forest Service will need to be not just looking at the footprint of the forest, but looking at that in the context of the whole landscape. And I think that'll come in handy when working with the LCCs. And, so we look at ownerships by various partners and stakeholders across the landscape. And the other point I want to make, another myth I've heard, we're not just focused on national forest lands. So many LCC folks have said, no, we don't have the Forest Service because there's no national forests, where we're working. Well, I think, Steve mentioned we're doing research across the country in every ecosystem, whether or not there is national forest land there or not. And a lot of times it's not even forest. We're doing a lot of work outside of forest ecosystems. Now, so somebody else asked about a business model for how can we work together, and Dave Hayes was talking about having skin in the game. Well, this is kind of a softer touch of having skin in the game, which is a model you might consider is and this would, have some discussions about over coffee, the Joint Fire Science Program. And that's where it's not one agency trying to entice other agencies to come along. It's all agencies in it from the beginning to the end, and the dollars are appropriated in that manner. And this is a really, you can talk to anyone who's been involved with this. This has been a really effective way. Happy customers here. Spanning boundaries, focused on the end user, active engagement. So the process is together they identify the questions, together they conduct the studies, and together they exchange the information, apply the results. Another tool, Service First, hopefully you heard of. We actually have a Service First staff person who can help us out if you have an idea. This is a mechanism to make it a whole lot easier, more efficient for these 4 agencies, BLM, Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Forest Service, just those 4 agencies. A lot easier for us to work together, better customer service, more efficient, and better conservation. Other thing I want to mention, at our table out by the escalators, we have the yellow pages for wildlife ecologist and our aquatic ecologist. It looks like this. You can either write to this email address and she'll send you one, or you can sign up for it at the table and we'll send you one. So that's the wildlife one, and here's the aquatic one. And that's to find out who's actually working on what. We'd like to have this for all disciplines, but we started with wildlife and fish. What are they currently working on? At a glance, you can find out who to call. So basically, Forest Service is enthusiastic about the LCCs because it presents a great opportunity for sharing resources, leveraging resources, sharing information, reducing duplication. That is, if you understand, we have to start before 2010 as the baseline of when duplication might have happened, because things already, we already have been doing a lot. Foster consistency and provide easier and more meaningful access to the rapidly changing science. And it's all about connections. I did a survey to the LCC coordinators and science coordinators about their interaction with Forest Service research, and it comes down to the need to know people and you need to have conversations. And there are these points of contact lists. If you don't have that already, just ask me. We have points of contact for each regional office and for each research station. And you can ask any Forest Service employee also how to find out more. We also have a representative on 21 of the 22 LCCs. And then we've got that Fish and Wildlife Scientist contact list. So I encourage you to make those connections. So we went through that quickly because we wanted to make sure we answered any questions or had any discussion. You can ask away for any of us. Yep.
I'll ask a question. I'm Jada. I work for the Forest Service. I don't engage particularly yet, at least, with any of the LCCs. And I'm curious in those points of contact or in people who are on the steering committees, are they from all deputy areas and all scales of the Forest Service, or do they tend to be research and regional office and not so much field level personnel or state and private forestry? Just curious if you have an idea what that's.
Yeah, most of them are from the National Forest System. About half of them are from research, I'd say, and I'd say a lot of them are at the regional office level. Some are at the National Forest level, and I don't think there's none from state and private. And for the science committees, some of them have National Forest folks on the science committees, not research. And on the other way, on the steering committees, some of them have science folks on the steering committees as opposed to National Forest. Mm-hmm. Yes, Gary?
Gary Morishima.
Can you stand up?
I do have a comment, I guess, in terms of the role that you're put up there with respect to the joint fire science process. I do not share your perspective in terms of how valid a useful role that is. Be happy to talk to you about some of the details about that later. But a number of questions sort of arose as you were going through the presentation here. We have two different entities, one within the Department of Interior, one within the Department of Agriculture, both trying to do similar things in terms of being the gatekeeper as to what best practices are and best science. And what I am curious about is whether or not there are plans underway to reconcile or integrate the methods, the models, the data that are employed to determine best science to apply in any particular situation. I think that that's an area that's going to run into a lot of potential conflict, and you need to figure out some way that you're going to resolve those differences between these two entities.
Okay, I'll take a quick shot at that and ask if anybody else wants to say something. My perspective on this is, my hope is that it's through the LCC science committees that the common ground will be the identification of scientific information needs, that regardless of how it will be used, in the end, that people will say, we all need to have information on water storage and water supply and what's going to happen in the next 50 years at this scale, kind of thing. And that's a place where we can be consistent. That's my short answer. Dave, could you speak to that? Dave Cleaves is our advisor.
Great question. Well, first of all, the joint fire science piece up there.
Can you stand up, please?
Okay, it was not necessarily just about joint fire science, is that in working in an interagency environment, we found that it's most successful when you have joint funding and joint governance. So we can argue about the products of the joint fire science program, but whether it's incident command system or land fire or any of these other big projects, we've had to put, it's basically the same thing I think David Hayes is saying. You have to have, everybody has to have something in the game, and you also have to have a mechanism by which you can jointly govern forward whatever you're doing. I think that there's a lot of opportunity with the LCC framework as it evolves in actually providing something. We've been trying to convince, I'll take the heat for this one, the inside of the USDA, bringing some resources forward so that we merge, not be acquired by, but merge with the LCC system and create more across the board, so we can actually bring this landscape scale conservation thing to life. We've got a lot to prove here. We're all talking about landscape scale conservation kind of glibly as if it's a great thing. Not everybody believes that. So I think there's a lot that we have to do together. I think we have to have a mechanism for that. But the second part of your question is great, because no, that's not happening at the level and with the intensity that it should have. And what I fear is that at one end of the mall in D.C. in particular, there's folks asking some actually pretty good questions about how are the government's assets being mobilized, and are those assets really complementary assets, or are they just collections of individual assets that don't add up? So I think that we're going to have back and make some key decisions, kind of up and down the whole system, USDA, Department of Interior, and others, together, about how to build more complementarity into those assets. If you stand back and look at it, it looks like lots of people doing lots of things, lots of agencies, but does it add up? So I think that we've got a strategy, an LCC strategy meeting tomorrow. I think we can get into some of those national scale questions. We don't have the equivalent of a wildland fire leadership council, cross-agency council that deals with landscape field conservation and things like that. That might be a start. I don't think there is. We got work to do. Next session.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment about reflective comment about the science of these two agencies look like they're working in a vacuum in relation to each other. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's a lot of mutual respect for USDA, science, Forest Service science, and at the level of projects of scientists and researchers, they're all aware as much as possible of this huge explosion of research, aware of what's going on in the field. And there's a lot of good collaboration and correspondence between individual scientists and programs. So don't go away with the impression that Forest Service science is done here, doesn't know what USDA science is doing.
So, anybody want to offer some ideas for how we can enhance the collaboration between Forest Service and DOI? Anything you see from where you sit? Yeah, Steve?
We've had really good success with these, what I was talking about, those doggy bags, those little very informal brown bag sessions monthly. We have a talk either from the LCC or the Science Centers or Forest Service, or this last one was from the state meteorologist. Really open up for general discussion and all kinds of things spin out of it. So, Ginger in the back is in charge of that for our area. And they're very fruitful. Not a lot of work goes into it. They're very informal. And there seems to be a lot of really good synergy that comes out of something that's simple.
Yep, Dave?
Is there any way, you said you have the new forest planning rule that's in place, and so that's, I presume the forests are on some type of planning cycle. Is that a set cycle? Is that something that's directed from Washington, or is that something that at the local level, a forest supervisor might be able to speed up?
Greg, why don't you take that one? Yeah.
Yeah, if there's a need for them to revise their plan, I think they'll get into the queue. And I think the governing factor is the funding available to a great extent. We only can get so much funding to support that planning effort, and so the forests are metered out over the years. And it's unfortunate that it goes that way, and I've been recognizing that there's a disjunct in the planning cycles and planning processes among the different agencies. So there's some level of inefficiency that may be bringing to bear. If we were all on the same planning cycle, we could come together with doing joint assessments real easily that meet our needs for supporting those separate planning efforts. But so I don't know how, where that's all eventually going to end up, but it may be that people step back and go, hey, maybe we can join forces and get on a similar schedule if there's some real benefit of working together on those kinds of joint schedules. So I don't know if that helps.
No, it's very realistic. It sounds like that it's pretty much set, but there might be some limited flexibility if it's wanted to.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
Claire Harper, also with the U.S. Forest Service here in Denver, or in Lakewood Regional Office. And my question is in response to kind of how do we move this forward, this interaction, make it a little bit more forward. And I'm looking at this from a regional level where, yes, we have an LCC coordinator, but we kind of tend to shove climate change into its own little stovepipe, even though it's an integrated issue and we all need to be thinking about. So my question is, how much have you engaged our National Leadership Council, our regional foresters in this discussion, and is there a way to really highlight that metric, us moving the needle into the NLC's minds. And we're doing this in a public-private partnership arena, which every quarter, our regional forester has to report back, what are we doing? Have we done anything? And so then it forces us at the staff level to do something every quarter. And so I'm just thinking of the National Leadership Council and really engaging them on the LCCs and in enough frequency that they really get it hammered in the brain that this is important. That may be more important than having a assigned person in our regional office. So anyway, just a suggestion to your questions. Okay.
Yeah, that was, what's happening with first, I'll be frank with you, what DOI was first, they were out of the box with this LCCs thing, so you get this typical kind of bureaucratic, they're out there, they got these things, and so they're asking us to collaborate, they're asking us to become their party. So there's kind of a standoffishness on the part of the Forest Service leadership on that, and there's this kind of tentativeness about, okay, should we get involved in this or not? There's a lot of discussion about the polygon, the shape of the LCCs. They seem to take in that small country. And so those are your polygons didn't match our polygons, and we went freaked out on the polygons. So, but as the LCCs have actually started to hire really good people, it's the people in the problem, not the polygon. It's proven to be impossible. And so I think the feedback that we're getting is that our folks are starting to work with the LCC coordinators and finding this is a good thing. We don't have to worry about what we were worried about before, and it may be time to revisit, because I revisited that once we got the airspan back with our ELT, or maybe a little too early, but maybe it's time to go back to the ELT and we got a lot. Anyway, it's got to be all right. And then, so they've had more of a chance to have some positive feedback, and that they've detected a little more, I think a lot more malleability on part of the LCC, the truly collaborative venture. I think we have no lessons. So that's a good suggestion. I think if the LCCs get some great people in place, there's some things are starting to happen.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Doug, again for this hour. We can continue the discussion. I think we have to leave